name's Gemma Ross and I work for Great Northern Books. I'm delighted today to have with us our author, Mr. Robert Ross, who has written a new book called Bestsellers, Peter Sellers, A Life in Comedy. Welcome, Robert.
Thank you, Gemma.
We're going to have a little bit of a chat about the book. So tell me, first of all, why did you want to write this particular book about Peter Sellers?
I've been a lifelong admirer of Peter Sellers. My dad was a massive fan. I was weaned on reel-to-reel tapes of the Goon shows, probably as a baby in arms. And the seed of the idea really came about when I saw an article about 18 months ago saying that we shouldn't be celebrating Peter Sellers' centenary, which is September 2025, because he was, quote, a monster. And regardless of what he was like in his personal life, this is a book purely about his legacy of love and laughter. The films and the radio shows and the TV shows that he made are still brilliantly funny. So although I do touch on the wealth and the weirdness and the whys, as we call it on the cover blurb, it's basically a sort of a celebration of a great comedy genius.
So what we're going to get then is a real intimate look at Peter Sellers' work and the films that he made. Were there any films as you were doing your research that jumped out to you that you feel, actually, this is a bit of an unsung hero?
Yeah, there is. It's interesting. There's that sort of weird early 70s period of Peter's life when Hollywood moguls dropped him and he went back to the Pink Panther movies in the mid 1970s. There's this sort of weird early 70s era where he basically just has a lot of fun. He works with Spike Milligan a lot from the Goon show. He makes some films that have been sort of unfairly neglected, really. One of which is The Great McGonagall, where Peter Sellers did a few weeks' work playing Queen Victoria. And Spike Milligan is the star as this really bad Scottish poet called William McGonagall. That's a sort of neglected gem, really. But it's just him having a great time with his old mate from those wonderful radio days of the 50s. And the Goon show mentality often is appreciated as how much that really impregnated his whole work. It runs right the way through his professional career, from the late 1940s, really, when he first met Spike Milligan, right up to his last completed film, The Fiendish Plot of Dr. Fu Manchu in 1980. That's a real goonish film as well. So for 30 years, that sort of manic, goonish comedy was at the heart of Peter's work.
And when you were going through the book, obviously you wanted to select some photographs, and I know there is going to be a colour plate within the book to have a look at some photographs of Peter. How did you decide which pictures to use? Because there's such a wealth of photographs of Peter.
There is, yeah. I mean, it's funny enough, I was having a conversation or a mild debate with someone on social media a few weeks ago where this person said that the problem with Peter Sellers' films is he always plays the same character. Peter is the one actor you can definitely say he always plays different characters, sometimes 7 or 8 in the same film. He's a wonderful sort of chameleon of an actor. So to try and distill that life in comedy down to 20 or so pictures was nigh on impossible, really. But there's some favourites in there, some bizarre cameos like the film The Wrong Box, where he plays a character called Dr. Pratt, who's surrounded by his cats, which is a lovely little cameo role for his good friend, director Brian Forbes. There's a shot from that. You can't not have something Pink Panther related. You can't not have something from his collaborations with Stanley Kubrick, particularly Dr. Strangelove, which in the year 2024 is even more sort of relevant than it ever was, I think. The world's on the brink of destruction, and the only solution is to laugh at it, which is what that film is all about. So, we made a conscious decision, myself and the powers that be at Great Northern Books, and yourself as part of this decision. There's no photographs of anybody else apart from Peter Sellers. It's all about Peter Sellers. The one sort of exception to that rule is the person the book is dedicated to, who I'm not going to mention who that is. But anyway, everything else is pure Peter in his many, many, many comedy guises.
Did you feel when you were doing your research that you learnt something new about Peter that perhaps hadn't been commented on before?
There's a few revelations in the book which I'm not at liberty to divulge quite yet because it's top secret stuff. But there is one particular fact which really bowled me over, which will change the history of Peter Sellers forever. There you go. But the one thing I really took away, I've always been a massive fan of his. I've read all the books, and I do make the point. I'm not naive here. I make the point in the very first line of the book. This is not the first book on Peter Sellers. It won't be the last book on Peter Sellers because we have a wonderful obsession about this great comedy actor. But I have read all the other books, not drawing the research of this book. I just watched all his work actually to try and submerge myself in his brilliance again. But I do know the stories about Peter's problematic mental health issues. He was, Barry Cryer once told me of the Goon Show. Spike Milligan and Peter Sellers really were mad. Harry Seacombe just pretended. So Peter and Spike were certifiably insane, really, and they somehow channeled that madness into their comedy. But I really found myself loving him again, having watched the work, and particularly in 1964, his real pivotal year, when he'd made the first two Inspector Clouseau films. He'd made his two films for Stanley Kubrick. He made all these wonderful British comedies, The Lady Killers and I'm All Right, Jack, and all these wonderful performances. He'd finished the run of The Goon Show, and just when he was on top of the world, when he'd married Britt Ekland in 1964, he had a catalogue of heart attacks. And you just see, for all the other reasons in his mad and wild life, he'd worked so hard, he'd had such ambition to get to this, international stardom, which he had in that day of April 1964, and then suddenly it almost went away. So you sort of appreciate why he made some quite unusual career choices in the 1970s, purely for the fun of it. That's why he did an episode of Sykes with Eric Sykes and Hattie Jakes, purely for the fun of it. That's why he reunited with Spike Milligan and Harry Seacombe for the last Goon Show of all, purely for the fun of it. So the book really is to try and resurrect this brilliant comedy career without all the angst surrounding it. It's quite hard to separate the man from the work, but you've got to do that because, that's what it's all about. His life was about comedy, and that's what he's left us, and it's still brilliantly funny.
Do you agree with the quote that Peter Sellers said where he said his personality had been surgically removed? He'd had it surgically removed. Having gone through his working career.
He loved that quote. It's actually a scripted quote. It's actually from the Muppet Show that he did in 1978. So it's a gag that's been written for him. He did like to pretend or to push himself forward as an actor that there was a blank canvas. There was nothing there. The real Peter Sellers didn't exist. He only became alive, really, when he was making people laugh. I don't quite buy that. I mean, it's true, he was a complete actor. He did submerge himself in those characters to become those characters. I remember talking to Spike Milligan, who said, that he would literally become wizened to play Henry Crun, or he would bloat himself up to become Bloodnok for the Goon Show. This is a radio show, right? But he's still becoming the characters in order for him to become those characters vocally. But listening to interviews with Peter, and I do quote him quite a lot in the book, I try and give his voice as much exposure as possible. He's a very intellectual actor. He understands how comedy works. He's a fan of comedy. He quotes Jack Tatty and Laurel and Hardy and Buster Keaton as heroes, and you see a lot of that slapstick in the Pink Panther films, certainly. And he's a real thinker. And as Charles Dickens said, you can't be a great mimic without being a great thinker. You need great empathy to become a great mimic. And Peter Sellers was the greatest mimic of all. He just, became those characters. Way before he was making films, he was an impressionist. He would go on to the musical stages and do Groucho Marx or, whoever he was doing, Winston Churchill or George Formby. And he was a brilliant mimic. And that's what informed him as an actor. He became those characters.
Why do you think that we are reaching what would be Peter Sellers' centenary next year? He would have been 100 years old. Why do you think now in 2024, at the time of publishing this book, that we still are fascinated, that we still want to learn more about this man? As you said, there have been other books. So What is it? Why
Not
do
as good as
we?
this one, though, of course. But no, I think it's because that madness of him. I think because we know so much about his personal life, and I've touched on it, as I say, briefly within the book when it sort of affects the comedy work he was doing at the time, which he did often actually. It has to affect it in some respects. Um, and he was very happy to talk to the press. Alec Guinness, his great hero, who he worked with twice, first of all in The Lady Killers and then 20 years later in Murder by Death in Hollywood, he told him in 1955, Peter, if you want to become a film star and an actor, do not give too much away to the press. Peter Sellers gave a lot away to the press. He loved to be, column inches in the newspapers, to the extent in the 1970s when his marriages were more covered than his films in a way. But I think we're just endlessly fascinated by this person. And because those films are so brilliant, if you've only seen the Inspector Clouseaus, if you've only seen the Pink Panthers, there is far, far, far more to Peter Sellers than those. But they are brilliant. They are the sort of the comedy equivalent of James Bond films. They're still shown on wet bank holiday weekends, those films. They still get new audiences. They are still brilliantly funny because they are timelessly funny. Somebody falling over or somebody falling into a lake or whatever. These wonderful sort of slapstick moments that Sellers and Blake Edwards, his filmmaking companion on that series of films, brought together are just timelessly funny. So the seed of those films and the mind behind all those great Goon Show characters and all those other great characters, we just want to find out more about it. But in this book, I've tried to sort of put him back on the comedy pedestal. I think he's been knocked off a bit. I think he's become more of a sort of a person you want to sort of bury into the brain of and try and work out how it ticks. And I think all you need to know about Peter Sellers is that he was in love with the Goon Show. And I make the point many, many times. Spike Milligan always said, if you want to make a joke or a point, say it many times. And I say it many times in the book that once a goon, always a goon. Peter just loved that series, loved that camaraderie of Spike and Harry, and in the early days, Michael Bentine. The four of them gelled as a unit somehow, and they shared not only wartime experiences, but shared a sort of abstract comedy, a love of the absurd. And that runs all the way through Peter's work, even in his most serious films, even in his most sort of personal films like Being There, his masterpiece, which he should have won the Academy Award for and didn't in 1979, 1980. It's still there. There's still a little twinkle of goonish humour in that character of Chance the gardener, and that's the essence of Peter as a comedian, really.
And when you set out to write this book, did you feel? I'm always intrigued as a writer. Do you feel that, as you've mentioned, there are mental health issues that is discussed within a little bit of the book, but do you feel yourself that you have to become that person, a bit like an actor? Did you feel some of the way he was thinking and behaving was affecting your life?
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, I try and I don't go into it too much. I do a solo show called A Comedy of Madness, which looks at not only Sellers but Spike Milligan and Tony Hancock and Kenneth Williams and Robin Williams, and there's a lot of sort of that mental illness within comedy, and the point is, if that had been sort of curtailed at the time, if he could have contained his demons, would that comedy have been so manic and out there? And I don't think it would have been, actually. But that's another book for another time. You do become the person, like Peter apparently became like the characters to a certain extent. And yes, certainly around that sort of 1964 era, when he'd had those heart attacks and he died basically. I mean, he was brought back several times. He was 38. If he died at 38, he'd be a comedy god. I mean, he's pretty big now, but with the body of work he'd achieved up to that point at the age of 38, I found myself admiring him even more than I'd ever done before. I found myself sort of identifying with him quite a lot in terms of all the sort of domestic and professional baggage that he got with him at the age of 38. And you do sort of find yourself going a little bit mad with it. I mean, I would find myself writing chapters and having just in the background records of the Goon Show playing, just as a sort of murmur, because I like to have his voice sort of just there, you know, and those characters sort of get into your head as they got into his head. Blue Bottle, or the whining voice of Blue Bottle, or the sort of the bumptious sort of money obsessed Bloodmark. They become part of your psyche. So yeah, you find yourself living with like sort of 15 different characters for a time. Just to sort of inform how you understand how he worked, really, but not for too long. You've got to switch off a bit, as you would go completely bonkers. But it's good to immerse yourself in somebody. If you're doing a biography, you really want to just think, eat, and sleep that person you're writing about, which I did for 18 months or whatever it was.
Well, thank you, Robert, very much.
Pleasure. Thank you.
We will stop there because I don't want to give too much of the book away. The book will be available from the 15th of October. It is available on pre-order now. You can visit our website, www.gnbooks.co.uk, to have your copy on pre-order and receive it right on the 15th of August. And if you order directly from us, you will receive a dedicated book plate from Robert Ross.
I am contractually obliged to sign those book plates, so yes, please order the signed copies.
And I know you're a little bit cheeky and sometimes you always put little quotes and things in there. Can we expect it this time? Will there be something different?
Absolutely. You will get unique books. I did that with a previous book I did called Forgotten Heroes of Comedy. If you pre-ordered that, every single dedication was different. So yes, you can rely on some Peter Sellers centric dedication. Everyone will be unique.
Thank you.
Right.
All right, and we look forward to seeing the book out in the shops. And if you do have any questions, please feel free to pop them in the comments below. And that is Bestsellers, Peter Sellers, His Life in Comedy. Hello, I'm Gemma Ross, and I'm the Public Relations Coordinator for Great Northern Books. If you've enjoyed this talk from Robert Ross about his latest book, Bestsellers, Peter Sellers, A Life in Comedy, then you may like to visit our website, www.gnbooks.co.uk, to check out some of our other entertainment books we currently have on offer. For example, we have The Squire of Knotty Ash and His Lady, which is an intimate biography about the late, great Ken Dodd. It is written by Tony Nicholson and Lady Anne Dodd. In addition to this, we also have another book from Tony Nicholson about Larry Grayson, titled Shut That Door, looking at the life and work of the late great Larry Grayson. We also have a book by Maria McCurlin. It is her intimate memoirs titled Bumps in the Road, a life and adventure in bite-sized chunks. And finally, our latest book that we currently have out is With the Beatles, From the Town Where They Were Born to Then and Now, written by Patrick Humphreys. All of these books are available on our website, and we look forward to welcoming you to the Great Northern Books community.